All right, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by Dr. Laura Knoll, who is a professor of medical microbiology and immunology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Knoll's research focuses on the host and pathogen interactions of protozoan parasites. So, Dr. Knoll, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. This will be fun.
So, when did you first get interested in parasites?
That was graduate school. I was actually a chemistry major, and I did synthetic organic chemistry for a while as an undergrad. And I kind of got bored with that because you either like get your product and you make it or you don't. And so I decided to go into biochemistry, and that's what I was doing my PhD in. And then I was at Washington University in St. Louis, and they have this integrated graduate program. So, people in biochemistry mingle with microbiologists. And so I started to learn a lot about microbiology from hanging out with the microbiology grad students. And then I learned about parasites and their totally fascinating, wacky life cycles. And I was really hooked.
Yeah, okay. So that's interesting. And what are the most common parasites then in terms of like infections of animals and people?
Oh, there's a lot of common parasites, and it depends on the region of the world you live in.
Okay.
So the parasite my lab mostly focuses on is called Toxoplasma gondii, and that is a really common parasite all over the world. It will replicate and cause a chronic infection in any warm-blooded animal that it encounters. So any mammal, any bird. It is well known as the reason that pregnant women aren't supposed to handle cats and cat litter because its sexual cycle is restricted to the cat intestine. So in the cat, it has its sexual recombination, and only the cat then poops out infectious or oocysts in its feces, and then those can become infectious in the environment. So toxoplasma is probably in about a third of the world's people. Has it as a chronic infection. Most of the time, it's in the brains. It's also super common in mammals. Mice have it a lot. I think even 50% of deer have it. So it's not just the carnivore animals have it more commonly. Bears, it's really common. Anything that eats undercooked meat is likely to be exposed, because that's the way people are most often exposed to the parasite. They You can get it from cat feces, but the most common way that people are exposed is from eating undercooked meat. So pregnant women should really fully cook their meat.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what parasites I've had in the past, but I definitely know from traveling abroad a fair amount that I've eaten abroad there's a few countries particularly that I've gone to time and time again where I've gotten sick like every time I go. So, uh
Yeah. There's a lot of different parasites that are pretty common in different countries. A lot of the helminth or worm parasites are common in soils. So if people walk around barefoot in certain areas, that's how they're more likely to be infected. So and some of them even have soil stages that they have to do developmental biology in the soil. So I think you're in Indiana, right?
yes,
And,
that's
and I'm
correct.
in Wisconsin. So a lot of time, most of the time, the winters get cold enough here that we don't really have a large helminth infection. But in areas where the ground really never freezes, they have a lot more problems with helminths in the soil.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I'm glad to know.
Yeah, your soil is good.
No, it's good. Never gonna not wear shoes again, I guess, otherwise. So,
Right. Yeah. It depends where you're be careful where you don't wear shoes.
yes, definitely. So, when people think of like, parasites that impact the brain, that seems like, kind of the more disturbing symptoms of some type of parasitic infection. Um, what exactly is going on then in animals that are impacted by a parasite that, sort of goes and affects their brain?
Yeah, so toxoplasma in particular, it seems to the chronic stage of the infection makes this cyst, and that will hang out in long-lived cells, so neurons or striated muscle, so like muscle tissue, the heart, but it's really common and most localized in the brain. And it's clear from studies that it has behavioral effects on rodents. So if you look at the life cycle of toxoplasma, the rodent is the most important part of the life cycle, because that's the part of the life cycle that's most likely to be preyed upon and eaten. I mean, it may have effects on people, but we're never preyed upon. So there's not going to be any evolutionary pressure for the parasite to change our behavior. So some people have tried to do some studies and looked at how behavioral changes are in people. It's just really difficult to do that with people. Because let's say that one study showed that there was if people that had car accidents in Europe were more likely to have toxoplasma. So the conclusion of the study was toxoplasma increases people to have riskier behavior. Well, maybe that's true, but maybe it's also that people that are bigger risk takers, like yourself, going to, other countries and eating the food off the street vendors, and maybe things aren't really cooked. Maybe people that are bigger risk takers are more likely to have toxoplasma, just
Okay.
because that's their personality. So it's very hard to do those, you can't do a controlled study in people, but the studies in rodents have been really well done. Because you can have them all in the identical environment. They can be genetically identical. They can be fed the exact same chow. And the only difference is, does it have the infection in their brain or not?
Okay. And so what type of symptoms then do like rodents, for example, or other animals infected with this have on their brain?
Yeah, they really are bigger risk takers. So if a rodent is infected with toxoplasma, if you put them in what's called an open field test, so if you put them in a box where it's open, a normal uninfected mouse is going to be really afraid of that open field, because they're afraid a hawk or something's going to swoop down and get them. So they'll hang out in the corner. They won't run around. A toxo-infected mouse is a bigger risk taker. So it'll explore that space and be like, hey, what's going on? So they're more likely to be caught in baited traps. The biggest one that really blew people's mind was they did a very nice study with urine attraction or repulsion. So normally uninfected mice are afraid of cat urine. And if you track their behavior, if you put them in a, let's say an open field, and you give them mouse urine to smell, rabbit urine to smell, nothing in one corner, and cat urine in the other corner, they will avoid that cat urine, very, very, they will have a strong proponent to not go to that cat urine. But if they're toxoplasma infected, they actually are attracted to the cat urine, and they spend more time in the cat urine corner, which just blew people's minds. Was really super interesting that they would now be attracted to the predator where they would have the sexual cycle.
Wow, it is pretty amazing because it is like, animals in general, everyone kind of has like their own little world inside their bodies. And these little things that get inside you and impact you, especially in animals when it comes to their mind, that's pretty fascinating. Is there
Yeah.
potential for anything like that to ever develop for people and impact people and sort of how their mind works at all? Or
You know, Probably not, because you have to think of what is the driving force for that. It's evolution, everything. So rodents are the most important part of the life cycle for toxoplasma. So anything that's going to change that rodent's behavior and make it more likely to be preyed upon, more likely to be eaten, is going to be selected for. So over, the thousands of years that this parasite has been evolving with its rodent host, it will select for, there's that selective pressure for changing the behavior of the mouse so that it's more likely to be preyed upon. People luckily aren't eaten by wild tigers and cats very often. I mean, not often enough that there's actually evolutionary pressure for that. And so there shouldn't be any sort of way that a parasite could evolve to change our behavior, because there won't be evolutionary pressure for that. I mean, you could think of some, interesting sci-fi or evil doctor scenarios where they could genetically modify it to do something, but that would all be science fiction.
Yeah, so we don't have to worry about any of that ever popping up. And
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
good to hear. Yeah, don't want to scare people into some type of zombie apocalypse type scenario.
Yeah, right. I mean, people could come up with that as a, fun book line, but it wouldn't really happen in reality, because the evolution, the time that toxo has been evolving in rodents is a really, thousands of years. So there's been a really strong selective pressure over all that time, and that doesn't happen quickly.
So how does one treat then such an infection in animals?
Good question. So for toxoplasma, and actually so parasitic infections in general are really neglected diseases of poverty. A lot of times, even with toxoplasma, I said, 30% of the world's human population, it tends to be our populations that are in disadvantaged conditions that are more likely to have parasitic infections, including toxoplasma. So because there isn't financial incentives, there really haven't been that many drugs that have been developed for toxoplasma. There is nothing that's really active against that chronic infection. So that gets to be problematic in people that, so you could do a test, Ben, and see if you had ever been exposed to toxoplasma in all your travels. You could do a blood test, and pregnant women are encouraged. I mean, women are encouraged before they get pregnant to have a toxoplasma titer done. In Europe, they do it all the time because toxoplasma is much more common in Europe than it is over here. So women go in for a pre-pregnancy exam and they see if they already have toxoplasma or not. The reason that that's important to do is that if you've already been exposed to the parasite, so I went in for a pre-pregnancy exam and I found out I had already been exposed to the parasite. So I didn't worry so much when I was pregnant, because I know my immune system, I have a healthy immune system, and I knew my immune system would kill off the parasite before it crossed the placenta and got to the baby. That's where it's a problem for pregnant women. It's not the women, it's the fetus that we worry about with toxoplasma. So I knew I didn't have to worry about it. So that was actually kind of nice for me to have that information. It's problematic if like I ever become HIV positive and I can't be treated, or if I get cancer and I have to have some of the severe treatments, or bone marrow transplants, anything that's going to really severely compromise my immune system is going to let that parasite reactivate in the brain, and those, that cyst form will now be the fast growing form, and that's bad. That was really problematic during the 80s, during the AIDS epidemic, because many people had that chronic infection and they became HIV positive before we had good treatments to, help their immune response stay healthy. The toxoplasma would reactivate, and so that was really bad in the 80s, and we don't have any medications to clear that. So there's nothing I can do about it. I just have to
Yikes.
monitor my immune system. There are treatments that we have against the fast growing form. They usually have to be taken in combination because neither of them are that effective. But we do have treatments against the fast growing form. But there are some parasitic infections we just don't have good treatments for. And really, none of them we have vaccines for. There is a vaccine for against Plasmodium, which causes malaria, that is partially rolling out in areas of sub-Saharan Africa. It's not all that efficacious, but it's better than nothing. So that's why they are using it in some areas. But we just don't have good vaccines against these at all. I wish we did.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, that's not very comforting, I guess. But
No, it's really not. Sorry, I don't mean to be not
yeah,
cheery, but it's not cheery.
yeah, no, that's the truth. So, I mean, I'm curious, and we're a world that's obviously just coming out of a major pandemic due to a virus. What's the chances of a pandemic due to some type of parasite?
It's probably not that likely, because most of the time parasitic infections can be controlled with good sanitation.
Okay.
So that's why they're more problematic in developing countries and people with less economic means. In even in our country, areas where they don't have good sanitation, or that they don't have access to really good, clean food, have more parasitic infections in general.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I mean, a lot of these, when there are though outbreaks in these communities, I think historically there have been some really deadly outbreaks, and places with poor sanitation. How big of an issue is this, given we don't have vaccines really for these things?
Yeah. What we do have to do in those situations is to just try to roll out the treatments we do have, and try to help the people. A good example of this is, in Egypt, when the Aswan Dam was built, there was flooding in areas after the dam was built, and that increased a parasitic infection called schistosomiasis. And so they rolled out the treatments that we had for that, and there was some problems with those rollouts that I won't get into, but that's what is sort of like the Band-Aid after the fact. There's no sort of
Okay.
preventative thought in a lot of times, because there isn't any preventions. I mean, if you don't have vaccines, all you can do is try to have the best hygienic conditions you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, is there anything about your research on parasites that has surprised you over time about, sort of how they work and function, or
Oh yeah, a lot of things about parasites are just boy. Um, so we did figure out at least part of the mechanism of why Toxoplasma has its sexual cycle in the cat. And we figured out that has to do with lipid metabolism. And, digging into this, cats have really different lipid metabolism, probably because they evolved as carnivores in a, desert in a low nutrient condition. And so they wanted to make sure all that lipid, because you and I, when we eat lipids, like let's say linoleic acid, for example, our bodies convert it, at least some of it, into lipid mediators that help control our immune response. Cats probably shut off that system because they didn't want to waste those calories on mediators of the immune response. They needed all those calories to go into, carbon to fuel their body so they could get the next hunt done.
Huh. Wow, okay, that's
So
interesting.
that was really fascinating when we figured that out. And it was like, oh, wow, this is all about like lipid metabolism and how they would have evolved differently.
Yeah. Huh. And how often are we discovering new parasites?
Oh, that is going to be really an interesting question. There are several of us that are I don't know if you've read much or maybe even had some podcasts on the human microbiome.
Mhm.
The human microbiome, and a lot of people take probiotics and think about probiotics. Those are all bacterial species, and what we focused on so far is all the bacteria.
Ah, okay.
We do have protozoans, we do have parasites, and there are healthy protozoans. There are protozoans that would be beneficial. I don't know if you've ever heard of the hygiene hypothesis.
Maybe, but you'd have to remind me. Yeah.
Yeah, so the hygiene hypothesis basically saying that Western civilizations are too clean now, and
Ah,
our hyper hygienic conditions and our, really clean water and all our fruits and vegetables being super clean and washed all the time has reduced the complexity of our microbiota in our guts. And that has made us more prone to allergies and asthma and other autoimmune diseases because we don't have that complexity in our guts. And a lot of the complexity that's missing is the parasites, both protozoan parasites, so single cell parasites, as well as the helminth, as well as the worms. Now, I'm not suggesting people
yeah.
go out and get worms, but like
No.
there have been some people that are so, their allergies are so bad and they're so desperate, they've gone over to countries where there's been worm infections and given themselves worm infections, and it has helped their allergies, and they're
Wow.
happier.
That's
So
interesting. I
yeah,
mean,
it's really interesting.
it's that idea doesn't seem too far off base for me. I know because when I lived in Uzbekistan, one of the things that the U.S. people at the U.S. embassy told me is that basically every person that comes from the U.S. will get sick within 2 weeks of being in this country, and you wonder, okay, clearly there's some big gap in terms of what's in our bodies and what's in the locals' bodies in terms of digesting the food and whatever's in the food. So
Yeah, right. And just having us have a immune response that's geared up and ready to respond to complex things and other parasitic organisms or other viruses. We just don't have that complexity anymore. And so our immune response isn't trained to see a lot of different things.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting because I know I've heard a lot of people recommend that before you go on a trip to some part of the world that's quite different than the U.S. that you just bring antibiotics with you from a doctor just in case because you're probably gonna get sick somewhere along the way. So uh,
Yeah, that is one way to do it, but then that also, antibiotics also kill off your normal
yeah,
healthy flora and your gut, so that's maybe
yeah,
not always the best thing.
yeah,
So
it's a
I know
mess.
some people think about like taking probiotics, and you have to,
Yeah,
be careful with that too, but or having a lot of like yogurt that actually has active culture to sort of increase their microbiota. But we haven't really focused much on the fungi
mhm,
or the protozoans or the helminths in what is considered a healthy gut. What
yeah,
did we evolve to have? Who are the friends that we evolved with? There's a lot of different protozoans that people have in different parts of the world that aren't causing disease.
mhm,
They're probably fine. So one of the ones we're looking at is called entamoeba. It's a big amoeba-like species, and it lives in the gut. And it can cause, there are some species of it called entamoeba histolytica, and that can cause disease in people. But most of the entamoeba species in people and in other organisms seem to be just more symbiotic and commensals and aren't really causing disease. So we're studying one of them right now called Entamoeba murus, which is a mouse commensal. It eats bacteria. It also can eat immune cells. So it's like really fascinating. We're going to really have a good time looking at like, how does this train the immune response, and how does this affect the gut microbiota, the bacteria that live in the gut, both the healthy and the non-healthy ones.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So that makes me curious. Then, since you're someone who's dedicated your life to studying parasites and these things that live inside bodies of animals and people, how does that make you reflect on sort of what it means to be a human being when you have like this little world inside of you with other living things? So,
Yeah. We are really a community, right? We are not these sterile beings, and we didn't evolve to be sterile beings. I don't think it is good for us to be hyper clean. When my kids were growing up, I didn't let them eat large quantities of dirt, but I tried to not be like, go out and be dirty, go out and do whatever the heck you want outside. Let them be more free range so they
yeah,
could get good exposures. So, because I think we are a like community, and we have to think about the organisms in us as, those are, okay, some of them are pathogens and we can be exposed to pathogens, but a lot of them are friends. They help us digest our food. They take up space and protect us from pathogens, right? Because that's what happens a lot of times when you take antibiotics, is you kill off the friends,
yep,
and then the bacteria species that are pathogens can, if they're resistant to the antibiotics, they can go, woohoo, all these other guys are out of the way, so I'm gonna like take over here.
yeah. I mean, especially concerning given how much antibiotics are abused, and then building up, things that are that like super bacteria and stuff that won't be impacted by antibiotics. So
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's definitely something to think about when you're traveling abroad too.
yeah. So are there any like maybe sort of newish parasites that you've come across or that you're familiar with that are kind of, you're a little disturbed by their potential impact on like the health of animals or people at all, or that most aren't aware of? Or
No, I'm not really. The newest ones, I've been into the microbiota and who are the helpers, and learning about I think for right now, there's a lot of space on learning about the beneficial
Mhm.
protozoan parasites. So there are parasites called Endolimax nana, Dientamoeba flagellus, Blastocystis huminis, that people have not heard about at all, that are really common in people, even in the United States. And we really know nothing about, are they harmful in some situations? Are they protecting people against inflammatory bowel disease? There's been some studies in Europe that I think there's only been one or two looking at Dientamoeba flagellus and Blastocystis huminis, and seeing a reduction in them in people that had inflammatory bowel disease. So again, that hygiene hypothesis, and maybe these are organisms that we evolved with, and when they're absent, our immune response is overstimulated. So I'm not so worried that there is a parasite out there that we haven't found that's going to suddenly cause an outbreak. I'm really interested in figuring out what are the species that we used to have and that some people have, and are those positive or negative?
Mm.
And I'm
Yeah.
trying to learn about those. Those are the new species that I'm really interested in learning. So I've been working with some different labs on developing techniques to look at the eukaryotes in the microbiota, so that we're not just focused on the bacteria.
Yeah.
So that I see as a really interesting new frontier that we're going to start to go after.
Yeah, that's really interesting, cool, and probably not something that most people think about. People are just afraid of like getting sick from something, but don't think as much about things that are good for us that are, to have. So
Well, people are thinking about
yeah,
probiotics.
I've heard that a lot. That's true. Yeah.
So I think it is starting to register with people that there are microorganisms that are good for our guts to have. And so I'd really like to learn what are the and it's difficult to call them parasites because they might not be taking things from us, really. They might be.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I just call them protozoans.
Yeah.
Are there eukaryotic microbes that we've been ignoring that would be good for us to learn about?
Yeah. And so like, do you know a few different sort of types that we have that are, really beneficial for people to have that you could sort of talk about? Since I feel like most people have no idea about what things are good that are in their guts.
Yeah, the little bit that's known, I already told you. So
Okay, perfect.
dientamoeba flagellis and Blastocystis hominis. There's been like 1 or 2 studies done in Europe. There's been nothing done in the United States.
Hmm.
And we really don't even know how common they are.
Okay.
All we know is that when have you heard of fecal microbiome transplants?
Nope, I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. So good for your listeners to learn about fecal microbiome transplants. So let's say somebody has had like long-term antibiotic use
Okay.
and their gut is just really unhealthy and they have pathogenic bacteria like Clostridium difficile or something that's causing disease. What they will do is take the bacteria from a healthy person and literally transplant it into a person with a diseased with inflammatory
Wow.
colon and try to give them get those new healthy microbiomes to take place. And that is actually very effective. It is done quite a bit with people because it is effective. Some people it doesn't work, but a lot of people it really does help. So
Wow, that's fascinating. I have no
there's a
idea. Yeah.
lot of science. There's a lot of science behind like what are the microbes and can we do that in a more sophisticated way? But right now that's what we're doing. So it's basically taking fecal samples from healthy people, testing them to make sure that there aren't pathogens there. For the protozoans, what they're doing is looking on a slide and looking for either things that have a flagella, because some of the protozoan species have flagella, and some of them are amoebas, like I brought up about the entamoeba. Some of them are amoebas, so you can see them actually moving like an amoeba on the slide. So if they see anything that's moving, they reject that sample because they don't know what it is and it could be
Right.
a pathogen.
Yeah.
It could also be a friend. They don't know, but they
Yeah.
they see it. So that happens in about 10% of the fecal microbiome transplant samples, that they see either something with a flagella or something that's amoeba shaped that's moving, and so they get rejected and they don't get used in other people.
So
But
how
otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was curious, like, how common are those type of procedures then for like these transplants?
Yeah, they're not uncommon. I don't
Okay.
know how common they are, but they're not
Yeah.
uncommon. And for some people, they've been really, really effective.
And I also wonder just if they're going to become more common in the future, if this is going to be a bigger problem where people are going to need such a procedure to be done, um, perhaps from over antibiotic use or whatever.
Yeah. They're mostly used right now for people that have kind of chronic C. diff. That bacterial species has a lot of toxins that it produces,
Hmm.
and so it's really damaging to people's intestinal tracts. And so trying to get bacterial species in there that will colonize and make it so that C. diff doesn't grow and doesn't have the space. That's been the most common and most effective use of fecal
Yeah,
microbiome
that makes
transfer.
that makes sense because I know that. I mean, I feel like in the U.S. we've become better at acknowledging that you should not take antibiotics for like a viral infection. Um,
Yes.
but I feel like a lot from my travels, a lot of the world has not really done much with that. I mean, there's still lots of places that you could travel to today, just go to a pharmacy and get antibiotics without prescription. and people will take it for everything, just
Yeah.
anything and everything, because they just don't know the difference between, bacterial infection or viral infection, and will just take it like candy, kind of. So it's really concerning, and it makes me think that such a procedure that you're describing would become more common over time. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's I think one of the reasons they're trying to get um more investment into probiotics, because that's essentially what it is. It's just, instead of taking it orally, you know I don't even know how they exactly do it, but yeah, I'll let you use your imagination.
yeah,
um but so they're trying to have more sophisticated ways of introducing orally healthy bacterial strains.
yeah,
But I would really like to explore in the future, are there healthy protozoan strains that we could
sure,
be introducing to people? And kind of some of the nice things about the protozoans is they're made to be environmentally resistant. A lot of the species have this so are encapsulated and are made to have soil stages or made to have water stages. And so they have a like sugar coated wall, so they're made to be fecally orally transplanted, so there isn't really processing that would need to be done. They're just sort of they're a naturally orally infectious agent.
yeah, okay. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And yeah, it's just a kind of another world, another layer of the complexity of life, I guess. And
Yes, yes, yeah. It is important to think about, antibiotic use for really all the bacteria, but also the parasites and all the fungi. Like antibiotic overuse has been affecting all of them.
yeah,
Um, and I have seen people also not really understand, not understand the differences of viruses and bacteria, but also not really understand that the antibiotics are affecting the bacteria and not your immune response. I
mm,
have heard people thinking that antibiotics are affecting your body's ability to attack the infection.
wow, okay,
It was like, oh no, that is
yeah,
not what they're
nope,
doing.
nope, that's not happening. Yeah,
Yeah, I have actually heard that quite a bit though, and I've gotten questions on that. So making sure people
yeah,
understand, no, they're attacking the microbes, and I think having them understand the evolution of a microbe and how a bacteria's doubling time is 20 minutes
mm,
only, right?
okay,
So they're doubling, they're reproducing every 20 minutes. So in a few hours, if you've got any kind of selective pressure to go around the antibiotic, within a few hours that's selected for.
wow,
So that's how fast. And that's what also happens with the other species too. That's how they evolve so much faster. We don't talk about evolution enough, I think, in the sciences and in biology,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I think so. Yeah, because it's you know, trying to keep pace with the evolution of these things is really important.
Exactly,
So
exactly. And if there are certain areas where evolution is not taught at all or not emphasized,
yeah,
biology doesn't make sense if you don't think about evolution.
yes, yeah, definitely.
It's like things like antibiotic resistance doesn't make sense unless you think about evolution and the doubling time of a bacteria or a virus and how fast they can mutate.
Yeah, it's a important piece of the puzzle, so it's good for people to understand that.
Yep, yep, cool.
Well, what else are you currently working on then, and what's the best way for people to keep track of your work?
Um, yeah, we're really focused a lot on we do some work with toxoplasma in the brain. We have a really neat model with it's not really neat for the rats. So there is a model for a disease called hereditary spastic paraplegia. So this is a disease where people lose their coordination. It's a neurodegeneration disease. And what we wanted to do with this model is to, there is some people that wonder if having toxoplasma in the brain is exacerbating some of the neurodegenerative diseases. And so this was a really good model for us to look at and say yes or no, because, you know, neurodegeneration is very different in a lot of different people. There's lots of different neurodegenerative diseases, and how it presents in people and how fast people develop symptoms really varies a lot. And a lot of that is their genetics and environment. But we were wondering if toxoplasma in the brain could be one of those environmental factors that is exacerbating neurodegenerative disease. And what we found in this model is that, yes, it does. It actually makes the rats lose their coordination much faster, and changes their brain. I won't get into the details, but basically changes some of the areas of their brain way more rapid than just the normal neurodegeneration. So that's
Wow.
some of the brain work we're doing, because we've noticed, and other people in the field have noticed, that toxoplasma chronic infection in the brain will make mice have seizures.
Geez, okay.
Especially if they're stressed, if they get a cage change, or, you know, you open the cage to give them more food, that can induce a seizure. And some of the physicians were asking me, well, you know, is toxoplasma ever thought about with epilepsy? And I've talked to them, and it's not. And so we're starting, you know, there are people that are looking, but we're also starting to look at that. Is toxoplasma one of the things that makes epilepsy worse in certain people? And is that something that we should be considering in diagnosis? Can we be more holistic when we look at diseases that we don't understand that well, all the causes, and see if toxoplasma could be part of that diagnosis and part of the reason that things are worse in certain people, or presenting faster?
Yeah, that's definitely something to figure out, because that would be important to know, I would think.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we are with the toxoplasma in the brain. And then a lot of the other things my lab is doing are very gut related. We're really interested in that, you know, what does it mean to have a healthy microbiome? How did we evolve? What microbes did we used to have that we don't have anymore? And how can we model that? We have a very, very cool system that I'm excited about, that we're working with biomedical engineers at UW. And we have made artificial guts. So we have these little microfluidic devices, and we have artificial guts next to artificial blood vessels. And then we can put the parasites, or, you know, bacterial microbiome, or whatever we want to test, into the gut space. And then we can put immune cells from healthy donors into the blood vessel. And then we can monitor the immune responses and the trafficking back and forth between that gut and that blood vessel. So it's, and we can do all of this with human tissue.
Wow.
So this is like the first way that we can really monitor that human immune response in a controlled way, and sort of get at what are those immune responses needed to control parasitic infections in the gut. So I'm really excited about that project. Just got that funded, and it just started this summer.
Geez,
So
congratulations. That sounds super cool.
yeah, we had a good meeting on that yesterday, and we're already making good progress and making new discoveries about because, you know, you can't do this in people.
Yeah, well, yes.
Right, you can't do this with people. And we try to model it in mouse, but the mouse immune response is not the same as a human.
True. Yep.
So it's just way better to monitor this in a with human immune cells. So
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Just shows how much technology continues to make advancements and impact these fields. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're hoping we can be able to use what we're developing and what we're learning to then make some vaccines against some of these intestinal parasites that we
Yeah.
don't have in vaccines. So I mentioned earlier Entamoeba histolytica. That's one of the parasitic infections we're modeling in these devices
Wow. Okay.
because
And
there's
so
no
how can,
vaccine for that.
yeah, yeah. Well, that'd be nice to be able to get, yes, vaccines for as much things as possible since
Yep,
they continue to be an issue otherwise.
yep.
What's the best way then for people to, like, keep track of your lab and the research you're doing?
Oh, I wish I could say I was super active on social media.
That's okay if you're, but if there's a website, they can still access what's
Yeah,
going on.
yeah. My website is updated all the time. So on my lab has a website through the University of Wisconsin Madison,
Hmm.
or even if you just Google my name,
Yeah,
my lab website will pop up, and we always update our publications on there.
that's cool.
So
That works.
yeah, yeah, that's a very good way, and happy to talk to people if they. I also had some experience for a while. I was doing science to script at the Wisconsin Institute of Discovery, so I was helping people with creative writing projects. So I'm always happy to talk to aspiring writers and help them,
Yeah,
because I'd like there to be more science in stories and all and more
yeah,
accurate science, right? So
sure.
I'm always happy to be a science consultant and help people have accurate science, or hook them up with people at the
Yep,
university to give them advice so they can make sure their science is accurate, that they're as accurate as possible. Sometimes you have to have fun with a story, but
sure.
trying to
Well,
be as accurate as possible.
yeah, I mean that's crucial, especially because having a scientifically literate society is very important for a successful one in the world.
Yes,
So
I 110% agree with that. Yep.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your knowledge. Yeah, pretty fascinating to get a glimpse sort of deeper into this world that we don't really see much, but it's there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, parasites are fascinating. I've been studying them now for 30 years, and it's just been, really, really interesting. It's also nice that you're able to do something that is research that's benefiting people.
yeah, it's
You
relevant.
know,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
relevant and it's fascinating and it's relevant. So it just really helps inspire you to get through those long days.
Yeah, makes an impact. So thanks for all the
Great.
work you do. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, this was super fun. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely.